Just came out. I heard there were very good reviews. I can't,
oh yes,
can't read
yeah,
German, but very great.
It's titled Palo Alto. It's the city where you've grown, isn't it?
Yeah, in California. Yeah.
Does the book is about teenagers living in Palo Alto. Does the book have any autobiographical moments?
That's a question I'm asked a lot. It is fiction, but it does take place in the city I grew up in at the time I grew up, and so you could say, you could look through it and find, if you knew what my life was like back then, you could certainly find a lot of similarities, or ways that I've used things that have actually happened. But everything is, recontextualized. So when something happened, when it actually happened, it had certain kinds of repercussions, it had certain kinds of meanings. But when it's put into, a new context, it's being used for different purposes. So you can't really consider it non-fiction or autobiographical. It's really fiction.
Okay, it's really fiction. FRANCOPRHENIA is shot together with Ian Olds. Ian was here, let me check, 2-3 years ago. Yeah, with the documentary Fixer.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it's great. It's really great. Yeah. How did you meet him?
So Ian is my co-director on FRANCOPRHENIA. I went to the NYU Film School, and he went to the Columbia Film School at the other side of New York. And when I was at NYU, I made a documentary about the American television show Saturday Night Live. Yeah. And it's I think one of our longest running shows. It's been on for 30 or 40 years, at least, comedy shows like that. And we started working on that, and it turned out really well. It still hasn't been released. We've sold it to a company called Oscilloscope, which was owned by Adam Yauch from the Beastie Boys, but Adam unfortunately just passed. So it will come out. It's just that that company is a little frazzled, understandably. So and then when I went and did the project with General Hospital, Ian came to me and said, sounds like a great project, I'd love to be a part of it, and so we did it together. And it was really just an experiment, or a way to try something new, and then the reaction was so large because in the States there's a certain hierarchy about entertainment that people kind of have in their heads, where usually they imagine the trajectory of an actor to maybe start on a soap opera, and then as they see it graduate to primetime television or film. But no one would ever imagine that an actor would want to go from working in films with Gus Van Sant and Danny Boyle to there were a lot of different levels or frames happening at once. So the character Franco ostensibly put on a show at MoCA, and there were sets built there, and those were the characters, sculptures, but they actually were, on a different level, they were actually sculptures or sets at the actual site that you could say was part of, my work, or at least my concept, because, I went to the museum and to the show with the idea, and then it resulted in an episode on...
Right in front of the camera.
I think, I would say that FRANCOPRHENIA is even less autobiographical than if you watch it, you'll see I have a very strange hairdo, I'm wearing tons of makeup because I'm on the soap opera, and there's an inner dialogue that happens. It's unusual for, you know, a documentary. And the inner dialogue is quite insane. It's not the inner dialogue that I have going on, you know, throughout my day. It's fictional. But what it does is it highlights the aspects of the film that are maybe nonfiction, where, you know, the cameras captured people putting on a show. So it's actual people doing their jobs. It's in some ways it is a portrait of labor in the entertainment industry, and then when that film came out, when Milk came out, there were premieres in New York, LA, and San Francisco, and which is, you know, that's a lot of premieres. And Gus wanted to do one more premiere in Portland, where he lives and where he shot My Own Private Idaho and shoots a lot of his films. And none of the other actors, I guess Sean didn't want to go. So he said to me, Gus said to me that if I went, he would give me a tour of all the locations where they shot My Own Private Idaho. And I said, okay. And so I went and we spent a day, and he took me around and, you know, told me more stories, and it was a great day. And then at the end he said, watch, you know, all of it. And so he said, all right, we'll try. So I went back 2 months later, and we spent 2 full days and sat and watched as much of the material as we could. I think there was about 30 hours. And when we were sitting there watching it, there were all these scenes that never made it into the original film. And and then he said, you know, while we were sitting there watching it, he said, it's funny, this is the process I go through when I'm about to cut a film, and it's making me want to, you know, cut this film again. And I said, yeah, well, you should. And not because not to make a better film, but just to, you know, really show all, you know, some of this material that nobody has ever seen except Gus and the editor, and now me. And he said, well, you know, it costs a lot of money to digitize it, and I don't have the money to do that. So that was like a light bulb in my head, and I went to Gucci and asked them to sponsor the project, and they did. And they digitized them, they paid for the digitization, and then at that moment, because now there are multiple copies, I humbly asked Gus if I could cut a version, and if he didn't like what I made, that, you know, I would never show to anybody. And he said yes. He's a very generous and open kind of collaborator, and did it, and he liked it, and we set up a show at an art gallery, the Gagosian Gallery in LA, and premiered it there, and then showed it at PS1, Momo's PS1 in New York, and at the Lincoln Center, and it's something I'm very, very proud of. People respond to it very well. It's not meant to compete with the original in any way. It's really, and it's not even supposed to, you know, the reason we put it out in these art contexts is that it's not what I consider working with people that don't have acting experience. Yeah, I mean, in the movie Idaho, the 2 main actors are first-time actors. I love working with, I guess, non-actors or people with very little acting experience, if they're, you know, right for the roles. Sometimes it can be, I think, even more interesting than a trained actor. Or, you know, in another movie I just directed, like, for instance, there's a scene with a blacksmith. And instead of going to an actor and asking him to learn how to be a blacksmith, we just went to a real blacksmith and had him, you know, kind of be himself. So I do enjoy using non-actors. But I also like using actors. So in Idaho, you could, you know, Udo Kier's in there, and yeah, I like to mix it up. It's all about the funding for the movies I do, and it's one of the reasons that I've really tried to find a way to make feature films for as little money as possible, so that I can make them in, you know, unconventional ways, or in ways that are most loyal to the subject rather than most loyal to making money.
Okay, one.
So, do we have to be afraid that we won't see you in so much movies anymore? That you're going to be more like focusing on your directing role, because that would be.
No, I still act. Some people would say I act in too many movies. No, I've been acting quite a bit. I won't stop. You know, my acting career allows me the opportunities to work with.
And the pupil, and like or the king or whatever you call it, and the future king has to kill his master. I mean, is that aspect, does it come, which is for me, very impressive, is that...
Is that what's going on with me and Gus? No.
No, sorry, I didn't. That was absolutely...
That's an interesting question. I mean, in the Henry IV plays by Shakespeare, Prince Hal, is sort of slumming. He's the prince, but he goes and hangs out with a bunch of thieves and riffraff. And Falstaff becomes his mentor. And then at the end of those plays, he assumes his crown.
No, it's an oral history, like an oral storytelling. Like, you know, when you think of literature, the hierarchy there, like written text, something like more close to myth and like a very
Well, I think, yeah.
way of telling the story.
Well, one of the things about soap operas that interest me the most is the way that they are serial in nature. That there's no end. It just goes on and on and on. And even with, you know, characters that die or killed can still come back. There's not only is there no end to the story, there's no end to the characters. It's just in America, some of these shows, they're all, you know, sadly being canceled now because of reality shows and talk shows. But some of them ran for, I think, 50 years, maybe 70 years, maybe and some of them started on the radio, and, you know, so they have such a long history, which is something that, you know, you just can't do with a, you know, 90-minute or 2-hour feature film. It's sort of has a beginning and an end, and you can do a sequel, but it's not going to have the same fluidity and ongoing serial nature as a soap opera. So so much material, you know, 5 shows a week. They need to do things with a much faster pace. They have a lower budget. So that means that the lighting is not going to be, you know, as perfected as, you know, a feature film. They're not going to have effects, special effects like a feature film. They're going to write scenes in a certain way because it's cheaper to have 2 people sit on a couch and say, you know, have very long conversations than it is to have them in a, you know, car chase scene. So you're going to find a lot of people just sitting and talking and talking and talking and talking. And so all of these things add up. And it creates its own kind of aesthetic.